So welcome everybody to the Microsoft 365 Platform Community Call. This is our weekly series happening every single Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific time, and Microsoft employees, so PMs, cloud advocates, and engineers do presentations and demos within these calls. We also covered the latest and updates from a news perspective related on our Microsoft 365 platform, and of course we'll do a quick group photo to gather all of us in the call. Well, technically it's only max 50 people in that group photo for now, but sooner or later it's going to be more than that. So let's hopefully we'll have more people visible in that group photo sooner or later. Now, today's agenda, we'll start with the latest updates and news on the Microsoft 365 platform. Like always, we'll have the monthly summary. So we're listing all of the people who've been active within the past month within the Microsoft 365 platform and their companies. This wasn't a massively successful month because it's understandable because it was the holiday season. So, but we're seeing a lot of excitement and community contributions across the open source areas within the January already. And then we'll have Dan, Patrick, and Sebastian doing the live demos today, starting like 1:15 or so. Now, quick recap on all of our assets, which are available for you to take advantage. We have two different YouTube channels. We have the official Microsoft 365 developer YouTube channel and the community YouTube channel, partly due to historical reasons, but you'll find useful videos in both of these. All of the community calls are getting recorded, and all of the demos in these community calls are getting also published on the community YouTube channel. And the official one has then bit more official demos, so to say, from the marketing side of the house and from cloud advocates. We have a lot of open source assets available for you to take advantage in a GitHub, but quite often it might be overwhelming and difficult to find the relevant sample for you. So that's why we have multiple different sample galleries available. And sooner and more we are promoting the one unified Microsoft 365 sample gallery, which we have more than 800 samples already available. I'm going to share the slide of that one in a second. And of course, if you're wondering that, wait, too many URLs, I can't remember all of this stuff. Luckily, there's only one URL to remember, which is the AKMS M365 PMP. Now, as always, we promote our Microsoft 365 developer program in this course. So please do sign up on this program. You will get a free E5 developer tenant with 25 accounts with no questions asked, as long as you use that tenant for developer purposes and validating on building stuff in the Microsoft 365 platform. So AKMS M365-dev program. We also have a lot of training material available, which are free for you to take advantage. And there's automatic tracking as long as you sign in. Technically, you don't have to even register and sign in to get access on all of these awesome materials. Today, as an example, Dan is going to cover some of the materials from some of the topics which are available from the Microsoft Learn. But please do take advantage of these. They are free for everybody to take advantage any way you want. We also have the unified Microsoft 365 sample gallery at AKMS M365-samples, where we have more than 880 samples already available from Microsoft and from the community. So we really want to make it easy for you to find a starting point for whatever you are looking into building in Microsoft 365 platform rather than starting from scratch. I saw some comments actually earlier today in Twitter from one of the MVPs saying, well, it's pretty cool. I was looking into doing 5 different technical topics, and I found samples for 4 of them directly as a starting point. So you don't actually need to start from scratch. You can always find a sample, adapt the code, and then use it in any way you want within your solution. All of the samples are, by the way, MIT licensed, and that means that you can take advantage of them any way you want, reuse the code, and hopefully make billions out of the Microsoft 365 platform, because that's obviously the objective. Now, on the sharing is caring. Now, if you're wondering how to get started on all of these things, we do have a sharing is caring program, and I'm going to throw it to David to do a quick intro on this one.
Excellent. Thank you, Vesa. Yes, as Vesa mentioned, we have a wide spectrum of opportunities for you to use the resources and contribute back, but there are oftentimes hurdles such as, how do I submit a pull request for the first time? Or I'd love to present a demo on one of the calls, but I'm a little new, a little nervous. I'd like some guidance. I'd like some help. Sharing is Caring is a program that is here to provide hands-on guidance and a safe space opportunity. Our sessions are not recorded with the exception of the AMAs, and it is an awesome opportunity for you to collaborate with members of the Patterns and Practices team and Microsoft employees to see how you can get more involved. Again, these are not recorded, they're safe space, they're absolutely free. We have a wide spectrum of topics. In fact, today we've got the Power Platform samples, first-time contributor. If you go to the Sharing is Caring site, you can still register for that. And we've got our upcoming AMAs on PNP React controls and Graph and MGT in the coming weeks. So again, don't hesitate. We'd love to get and collaborate with you. aka.ms/sharing is caring. Vesa, back to you.
Excellent. Thank you, David, on that one. Now, a few recurrent slides. We do have two different podcasts related on our Microsoft 365 areas from Microsoft. First of them is the Microsoft 365 Developer Podcast from Jeremy Fake, and then Paul Schaffelein. Paul is an MVP and Jeremy is from Microsoft. And this is a great podcast to stay up to date on what's happening within the Microsoft 365 developer areas. The second podcast is hosted by me and Waldek Mastercards. Waldek is a cloud advocate from the Microsoft 365 Cloud Advocates. And in this one, we also cover the latest news, latest updates from the community, and we typically have a visitor in the show as well to talk about different topics for their careers, development, and all of that stuff as well. The latest one, we had Rabia Williams, who is a cloud advocate from Australia, and we talk about her career development and what it means to be a cloud advocate, and that went live actually earlier today. Now, on the official news on the Microsoft 365 platform, we actually have technically only one news from the typical blog posts, which is the new single sign-on service for Office add-ins is rolling out into Office on the web. And this is a relatively short blog post explaining the new simplified single sign-on opportunities for Office add-ins, and then referencing the new documentation. So if you're building stuff for Office add-ins, please do take advantage of that one. So it simplifies the authentication model for sure. The second new blog post, which is actually from the SharePoint syntax blogs, which is a bit not that well-known location, but there's a new Graph API support for content type sync enhancements. And what this means that if you are familiar with SharePoint and SharePoint content type hubs, there's a Graph APIs to publish your content types from the content type hub towards the individual site collections. And this is kind of a typical scenario in the enterprise content management world, where you want to make sure that the specific metadata is available within all of the libraries within a tenant. So there's improvements in the Microsoft Graph area on that. Now, a few updates also on our monthly summaries. So now that we have the monthly summary out as well, so this one was released earlier today, or was it yesterday night? I can't remember. Time flies when you're having fun. But we do have a monthly summary related on all of the activities which have happened within the past month. So all of the videos, all of the news, all of the contributors, all of the samples, and all of that stuff for you, which you can find from the single blog post. And in the blog post, like typically, we call out all of the open source contributors and community members who've been active within the past month. So thank you for being actively involved and helping us to build this community. It's really great to see this many people, even on a holiday month, to actually being actively involved and creating samples, blog posts, documentation contributions within a GitHub, which is absolutely brilliant. And let's keep on doing this. On the company side of the house, that's the list of companies which we have a permission to show their logo. So thank you for these companies and their employees being involved on contributing on our open source areas, and the companies allowing their employees to actually be actively involved in the community areas. Thank you for that. And on the Microsoft side, a big list of people as well. It's great to see the growing number of Microsoft people who are actively involved. Now quickly watching the list, I do not know why Bob German has a plus on front of his name, but hey, Bob is Bob and Bert is Bert, so it's good to call them out specifically on the list as well. Maybe I should have actually double-checked that one, but thank you for the Microsoft employees being involved as well. Now, before we go to the actual demos of today, it is a Together mode picture time, so let's actually move into the English is hard. Together mode, and let me start the recorder. I will move you on the right Together mode process in here. I'm waiting Seb to be the example, again on the back row or wherever we're seeing you soon. Let's wait a few more, 20 seconds, a little bit more time. We're not yet in max 50. We're getting there. Okay, I will push the button and start recording. Not yet. And here we go. So let's do some hand waving, everybody. We'll grab a GIF animation out of this one. Thank you for joining us once again on this weekly community call. Awesome to have you in here. Brilliant to see the familiar faces week after week. This is a great way of still seeing, actually being like an in-person events, even though That hasn't happened for a while, so thank you for that. Excellent. I will catch that one, and we'll grab a GIF animation out of that one. Now, time to go to the actual stars of the day. Except, of course, Zip is being the ultimate star on the slide as well. That's such a great GIF animation, by the way. But let's actually move on to the actual stars of the day. And we'll start with Dan, move then to Patrick, and then Sebastian as the last demo of today. And I can see Dan on the call. So let's jump on your screen and move forward from there.
All right. Well, folks, I'm excited to be here with you. This is, I've watched some of the recordings, but it's the first time I've been able to join live. And so this will be fun. I'm looking forward to talking with you real quick here. So let me go ahead and start up. I only have a few slides to go over. Really, the goal of this is to introduce you to a feature that's part of Microsoft Graph, and it allows you to pull in email into your custom apps, and you could even do a lot more than that. But as Vesa mentioned, my name is Dan Wallin. I'm a cloud developer advocate at Microsoft. And like I said, I'm really excited to be here to talk with you today. So let's jump on in. A lot of you probably know all about Microsoft Graph and know that you can get to things like mail. You can get conversations from Teams, files, events, calendar items, meetings, and more. And the list just goes on and on and on. But I know there might be a few of you that say, yeah, I've heard of it. I know a little bit what it is, but maybe I haven't done it. So I'm going to speak to you real quick. If I were to sum up Microsoft Graph, I'd say that it's a secured, unified API. And that means I can learn one general API and get access to all the stuff you see on the screen here and much more, actually. Now, you might wonder, why would I need access in this case to, say, email? Well, let's say we have a customer application, and in this application, people can work with customers, orders, maybe invoices, stuff like that. You know, there's only about 1 million of these out there that some of you have probably written, actually. And how many times have you worked in an app where you say, you know, to complete this info, whatever I'm doing, I'm pretty sure there was an email I received or I sent, or maybe there was a calendar meeting scheduled about it. And then you jump to your email client. If you're like me, you kind of forget what you were doing in the first place. You get distracted, and then you're like, oh yeah, the whole reason I was here, because then you start checking email, was to get this one email to then plug that information into the app. A lot of context shifting there, and there's a lot of organizational data and intelligence that as developers, we just don't generally think of. We kind of think of forms over data, database-driven apps. But what if you could take your app to the next level and actually bring content that would be valuable to users where they work? Now, of course, if you're going to access their email or their files or things like that, it needs to be very secure. So everything I'm going to talk about relates to Microsoft Identity. And once we've authenticated and done a little bit more from a coding standpoint, we can get what's called an access token. And that access token is kind of like the key to say, hey, Microsoft Graph, I want to be able to get this or this or this. Now, the user, and there's a couple of ways you can do this at the app level or the user. I'm going to talk about the user today. They can actually then accept, and you've probably all seen this, you know, this app would like to access your email in read only or maybe read write, or this app would like to get to your files. So you have permissions that the user will have to accept. Assuming they accept that, though, we can use the access token that will be generated, and we can actually make these calls. And that's what we're going to talk about. So the good news here is I only have about 15 minutes or so. So this will be really quick, but this is all in a Microsoft Learn module, as mentioned earlier. So everything that you see here, you can get to after. You can get step-by-step instructions. I'm going to walk you through just a quick high-level overview, show you a quick demo, and then we'll kind of jump into the rest of this will be up to you. So what the Learn module will have you do is we need an app. Well, we'll have a GitHub repo you can clone. Then we need to register that app in AAD, Azure Active Directory. It'll walk you through that. And then this is a .NET Core demo I'm going to do. Now, I want to emphasize that you could be doing Python or JavaScript or Java or whatever it may be, and you could do the same thing. Today, I'm going to focus on .NET Core, but again, it's open to pretty much any language and framework just about that's out there. So we're going to be talking a little bit about middleware real quick. a custom class called Graph Email Client that's part of this module for Learn. And then we're going to show how to use that to call Microsoft Graph and then ultimately render emails. So with that, let's go ahead and jump on in. Now, I'm going to open VS Code, and the only reason I really debated this, I have Visual Studio on here. I'm on Windows today. I also work on Mac a lot. But I know some of you are on maybe Linux, some are on Mac, some are on Windows, and this works anywhere. So I just wanted to emphasize that and make that point clear. So I'm going to go ahead and do it in VS Code. Now, let me first start off by kind of showing the demo. When you go to the Learn module, they'll have you clone a GitHub repo. And that's going to have a begin solution that you'll work with. I'm going to work, given that I have about 10 minutes left, with the end solution. So you're not going to see a lot of typing. But I want to run this demo just really quick so you can get an idea of what you can do. So we're going to do a standard .NET run. It should be pretty quick because I've already built, and there we go. So you'll notice localhost 5001. So I'm going to run over to Edge here, and I already have 5001 up, and let's go ahead and hit this. Now, you'll notice right off the bat, and you're all pretty used to this, the custom app is now asking me to, log in, give my credentials. Well, that's because, as you're going to see in this module, we'll walk you through registering your app with Azure Active Directory, and then I'm going to talk about the middleware code that kind of ties that to Azure Active Directory in just a moment. Now, I have a developer tenant. If you don't have one of these, you should get one. They are super cool. This was mentioned earlier. You basically get your own Microsoft 365 environment, and you can even be admin. So if at work they deny you from doing certain things, you can do whatever you want with this one. All right, so let me go ahead and log in. And this is in a private window, so it won't really matter if I stay logged in. And what this should show is my profile to start. Now, if you go through this Learn module, this part of the code will be done for you. But you're going to notice I have Welcome Dan. I went into one of my users that the custom developer tenant gave me, renamed it to myself, put in my photo. And then up here, you'll notice I can sign out. And then this is actually my, my fake cloned, I guess you could say, status. And right now I'm busy. And if I actually went to Teams and changed that to available and then refreshed, then this is also using Microsoft Graph to kind of show presence. And that's kind of cool. You could integrate that. Now, we're not going to have time to go into that today because we're going to focus on the email aspect. So this is now pulling email live from my developer tenant that I have. There's some other, just as a heads up, I think beginning of February, I'm back to talk a little bit about calendar events. We're going to do kind of the same thing. And then there's already been, I think my colleague Bob German, who you all probably know pretty well, he gave a talk on files. You can upload, download files and things. But when it comes to email, email's a little interesting when it comes to what we typically call paging. So email, we typically batch. And the reason is that what goes into your inbox, not just email, right? You have calendar invites and other things that can show up as well. So what this call to Microsoft Graph will do, which I'll show you in a moment, is it'll actually filter out the stuff that's not email messages. So now if I come down to the bottom and say next page, it's not contiguous as far as the order goes. So in other words, if I had 25 things in my inbox, but 5 of those were meeting invites or something, then this will automatically take that out. So luckily, there's a way to grab the next batch of email without having to write any custom code to say, ignore this, ignore this, ignore this. It'll just kind of do that for us. So really nice. All right, so that's just what you'll end up building in the demo. So I can go ahead and I can do the normal sign out, close my browser, those type of things. Okay, so let's spend the rest of the time by going through some of the code here. And what I'm going to talk about just really quick is, first off, there's going to be 3 key assemblies that this project will use. You'll see Microsoft Identity Web, Web UI, and then Web Microsoft Graph. This is where most of what I'm going to show you is going to come from, but there's some extension methods in just a moment. They're going to come from these top 2 as well. So I'm going to jump to our startup CS. Now, if you've done .NET Core at all, and if you haven't, don't worry, because it's similar no matter what language or framework you use, just different code, obviously. But we have our standard suspects here. This is, if you're new to this, this is what kind of fires up, one of the first things that fires up. So we register our configuration, and then this is where we configure our services. And quite honestly, this is generally the most challenging thing to get right when you do this with pretty much anything involving security, right? The good news is, first off, I don't have this memorized. I am really good at leveraging code I've already written. How many of you, quick show of hands, borrow from yourself on a very frequent basis? If you do, that's good. But I do want to walk through just really quickly some fundamentals here. So you'll notice we have some services, and we're going to configure using extension methods, things like what are we going to use for authentication, OpenID Connect authentication scheme. We want to add Microsoft Identity, the web app. You saw I just used that actually to log in. But this is these next two are the really critical pieces for Microsoft Graph. Notice enable token acquisition to call downstream API. What's that mean? Well, once I logged in, what did the homepage show? It showed a profile. This allows the token that we're going to get back ultimately to be used to call Microsoft Graph. That's what this is setting up, and you'll kind of see that in the comments. And then we actually add some configuration information from app settings into this add Microsoft Graph extension method. From there, we have some other things like where are we going to store the tokens? In this case, it's in memory cache. There is some other options. Now, the last thing I want to point out in this section is that you'll notice right here that we have this authorization policy builder. What this is going to do is actually make it so you have to log in to every page, even the home page, because I'm going to call Microsoft Graph. I need to know who you are. All right, now that's the main middleware, and that's a really quick overview, I'll admit. If you check out the Learn module, there's a lot more detail on this, but this is one of those things you generally get right once, and then you call it a day, and then you're good to go. Now, I'm going to jump down. There's some bonus stuff in here that's commented out, but I want to jump down to these guys. This is where we're going to register for dependency injection, some custom classes. So you'll notice earlier I got the profile and I got the email, and I could have shown calendar and files and stuff like that. Well, this is the last piece we're going to talk about actually today. The final piece in this file I want to show you, though, is we configured everything for the middleware. This is actually where we then say, okay, let's use this as middleware. And if you're new to middleware, it's kind of like a subway. The request is like the subway going this direction. Maybe it goes east and it hits this stop, this stop, this stop, and something happens at each of those stops. Like we check your credentials, we check for a token. And then what happens when the subway gets to the end? It turns around, and then you can have response subway stops that could add a cookie, for example, add a token. Things like that. So if you're new to it, that's kind of what middleware does. It's kind of like a subway train. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about, I think, is the fun part. And I do want to emphasize, let me show one more quick thing here. So when you go to this Learn module, and I'll have a link again at the end, and you hit Start, there's going to be units. And one of the units, and if you're new to this, it's really good to know, though, is configuring your app. Now, I don't have time to go into all of this part, but I want to assure you that there are screenshots and step-by-step instructions on how to actually do this for a .NET Core app, and really just any server-side type web app like the one I'm showing right now. And literally, it'll take you like 5 minutes. So if you're new to this, there'll be step-by-step on how to get through that. Now, the last little piece I want to show you is, okay, that's great. So we just hooked up our authentication, how tokens can get exchanged, but how do we actually make the Microsoft Graph call? Well, the assembly I showed earlier for the web Microsoft Graph, there's a Graph service client in there. And if you haven't worked with Microsoft Graph before, I would encourage you to go to aka.ms/GE Graph Explorer. And this is where you can actually play with it. So like, here's my profile, and I should get back some JSON. My bandwidth is not cooperating right now. Email and stuff like that. So this is a great place to learn about the API calls. Notice this me/messages right here. Okay, let me go ahead and go back. And what we're going to do is, instead of having to do raw REST calls, We're going to use this graph service client here. We're going to inject it right there, store it in a field. And now look at this code right here. All right, it's actually going to say, let's use this graph service client. There's the me, that would just get the profile. That's actually in the graph profile client class. But in this case, we want email messages. That's what I want to request. Now, there's a lot of data with email messages, and I'm saying I only want the subject, the preview of the body, not the whole body, because that can get kind of big. And then I want the receive date time here, and we're going to order by that, and then grab the first 10, the top 10. Now, there's some more code in here for the load the next batch if you're interested. That's all in the Learn module, but I'm real close to out of time here. So luckily, I'm on schedule. I have one last thing to show you. So this is great because now we have a reusable method called get user messages to go get our messages, but we need to display them in a page, right? So this is using ASP.NET Core Razor Pages. If you haven't used that before and you do .NET Core, it is awesome. I love it. MVC is great, but I'm a big fan of Razor Pages. So I'm going to go into email cshtml.cs, and you'll see it's pretty clean. We have a little authorization attribute on top of our class. But other than that, we have two properties, and we inject our graph email client. Okay, we're going to store that in a field. And now look how clean it is to actually get our messages. Now, this one adds just a little bit more for the batching aspect, but if you look up this method and go through the module, it's pretty much the identical code I showed here. In fact, you'll see it right here. But Microsoft Graph will return you a link you can use to get the next page, if you will, or batch of emails. So this will all be in the code if you're interested in doing that. Now, once we get our messages, we hook that into a property called messages, and then, of course, we render it. So in here, we check if the user is authenticated. Do we have any messages? And then if we do, we're going to go ahead and loop through them. And this is where you actually saw those little kind of cards, if you will, written out. So that's a really quick overview. It's actually a lot to throw at you in 15 minutes or so. But to wrap up, my kind of final thoughts on this for you are the following. If you are currently working on an app that integrates, RESTful API calls and maybe database data, which probably almost all of you are, I would challenge you to consider what type of organizational data could you include. Now, we just covered email, but there are many other examples out there you can include so the user doesn't have to go jumping around. They can get right to that data right in the app. It's amazing how much more productive we can make our users. It reduces user context switching. Of course, we secure the app with Microsoft Identity, so it's super secure and there's permissions involved. And then, as I showed, you can encapsulate this and you could reuse it across apps as well. You can make a reusable class library, for example. So if you get some time, have fun and go through the Learn module on your own. Here's the link again. And I hope you enjoyed what you heard. I hope if you haven't thought about doing this, that you will, because it really can take your apps to the next level. So with that, let me go ahead and stop sharing here, and I'll turn it back over to everybody else.
Thank you, Dan. Really, really great teaser and a quick demo related on the power of the Microsoft Graph. So really, really awesome stuff.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, Patrick, you're next on the queue.
So what we're going to talk about today is state in SPFX ACEs. And there's been a few questions I've heard from folks on state. There's a little bit of confusion maybe around state and how it relates to React state, because the methods you call, such as set state, are very similar. So one thing in React you can think about is every component in React can have a state of its own. So it can internalize its own state. You don't have to have a state in React. You can work without a state, but you can always have a state in a component in React. And in SPFX ACEs, the state is shared across all of the card views or quick views inside that ACE. So every view shares the same state. Now, the reason for that is kind of like React is a much bigger thing. It's made to model potentially entire websites, much more complex systems. whereas ACEs are more designed conceptually around a single user experience at a time, where it makes sense to have a single state. So something like a COVID check-in, checking the weather, reserving a desk in an office, or booking a flight. Single interactions that typically would have, understandably, this idea of a shared state. So let's real quick look at a demo here. And so I want to refresh this page real quick. And you'll see when this first loads, I'm going to bump it into preview, it says 0 items found, and we'll just wait a little bit. Now it says 10 items found. And I'm going to click on the quick view, and you'll see I get this beautiful quick view card here, and it said loading, and now I get this information here. And I've got some buttons I can go previous, next. So loading again, why are we loading there? Why don't we just have that stuff ready? So this idea of state is important to understand. Everything in state is in memory. So you only want to load what you need at any given time. So let's, looking at that demo, we'll come back to that decrypt button here in a second, but I want to jump into some code. So this is a simple ACE extension that is more or less boilerplate, except for a couple of things. I've updated the state here to have a collection of items that are of this type up here with an ID, a title, and details, and then an active index number. That's which one I'm showing on that quick view at any time, right? And I'm going to come down here, and we always need to establish an initial state. And our initial state is always going to be nothing, right? It might be something. You could load something from cache. And again, I apologize for my voice. I'm coming off a really bad cold. But the state, you could load something from local storage, things like that. But we're going to start off with a state of no items, and our active index is -1, indicating to our code that nothing is or could be really selected right now. And then we're going to ignore this for a second, and we're going to do our normal card view setup or quick view navigator setup. The rest of this is all the boilerplate you get when you start up a solution. And then I want to, real quick, before I talk about that code, come to our card view. And our card view is the card view you get right when you scaffold it, except I've just updated it here to reference this.state items length. And all we're saying is, hey, we found the length of the items array. And you saw that started out at 0 and then updated to 10, because we actually have 10 items in that list that's backing this example. And we come up here, and so what we do is we set our initial state, and then this other stuff happens. But what we do is delay here just so we can see the asynchronous effects of updating the UI and the flow. But we're going to get this data out of SharePoint. This is just some stuff to ensure we've got the sample list. We're going to get our items, and then we're going to set the state with those items. And then we're checking to see if we got some items, juggle our active index there. But we just want to set those items. So real quick, let's look at the get items method here. And so this is a case of where we only want to load what we need into state at any given time. But we want to load enough, to sort of optimize our network calls, right? So we want to load it as little as we can, but just enough. So it's a balancing act that I encourage you as you're building your applications to really think about that and think about those trade-offs of where you can keep stuff in state, keep stuff perhaps in local storage or session storage to reduce network calls. But then for things that are very large, only request those via network calls when it makes sense. And so what we're doing is we're getting the top 20, and we're selecting only the title and the ID. In this example, this sample details is a text field, but it could be potentially 100 other fields on a record, right, in a list, or a bunch of user data out of graph, or something out of a SQL database that potentially has thousands of data points to it. So we only want to load the details when we need the details. The other thing we're doing here is we're caching in local storage. And this is another great capability you should take advantage of when you're doing any kind of SPFX programming, whether it's web parts or whether it's ACEs. Store things that make sense to store in local storage or session storage, whichever is appropriate for your application, but make use of caching as much as you can. I know Graph Library supports caching, PNP.js supports caching, or you can just do the caching on your own, accessing the local or session storage directly. So we're going to get our items, we're going to stick them in our local storage, and we're going to prepend this little results transform into our stuff here, and then we're going to get our items back out. And so we can see we get our items. But when we get those items, another very interesting capability of state, and this is very similar to React, similar to React, works the same as you might imagine in ACEs, where when you set the state, the application is going to update the UI for things that depend on that state. So the only thing we've done here is set the state. And because in our card view, we reference the state, when we refresh our page, we're going to get our 0 items and then our 10 items very quickly. And so this updates with no further code on our part. So you can also think of state a little bit like event-based program control. Updating state causes your application to do things or to change and update its UI. So it's another important thing to think about when you're thinking about state. The next piece of state I want to talk about is this idea of only loading things as you need them. If we look at the quick view, we only want to load these details when an item is selected. We default to selecting the first item, item 0, index 0, but then we have previous and next buttons here that you all have seen paging before in programming. No reason to go into depth there. We're only going to load those details. And we're not going to store those details in local storage or session storage, though we could. But again, that's thinking about the trade-off, storing stuff in memory, storing stuff in the browser on disk, essentially, because there's trade-off times between reading lots of data off the disk as well versus network requests. So things to really think about with state. But we're going to update our item. And because of the way JavaScript works, we can get our items, we can get the message out of those items. We can set that message's details once we get them, and then we can set the state of that entire collection again. And we'll actually, because of the way references work and such in JavaScript, we'll have updated the state again, and we're able to page through our items using the state. So we'll come back and we will look at that real quick. And so we'll go to our quick view. We're loading there, and these are artificial delays I've put in there. So this would be a lot faster, but I've put a little 3-second delay in there. So we can click through, we can see that's loading, right? We can click through, we can see that's loading. But when we go back, because we're updating the state, we don't need to load it again. We've got that value in memory. So we've loaded it only when we need it, but we've held on to it in case the user wants to go back and forth through the data. And if we go to the next one, we can see we're making those web calls there. And so just to show you kind of a little bit of the casting behind the scenes, we'll go to the network tab, we'll go to our quick view. We've made no request there. We're loading here, and we get our item there. If we go previous, nothing happens because we've got our value in state. Previous, nothing happens, still in state. 5 is in state, and then 6 will show up because it was not in state. And so we get our values there. And so that's a quick overview of state. And one thing I really want to kind of sort of remind you of is state is this shared idea inside SPFX ACEs. So all of the views, whether it's a quick view or a card view, even if you have multiple quick views, that state is shared within the context of that ACE. But you can also expand your thinking of state to also be state is what's stored in local or session storage. State is also what view is currently being shown. You can have multiple card views, multiple quick views. Which one is being shown? That's conceptually part of your state. And then finally, state is also a little bit of program event-based flow control. When you update the state, things in the UI will update and change. So you can think about how the user interaction is going to change the UI and back and forth with updating state. Some things to be careful of. You don't want to update state too often. You don't want to update state in a loop, right? So you might update state that triggers another thing that goes and updates the state that somehow gets you in a loop there. Something to be careful of there. So keep those things in mind when you're dealing with state. Finally, just for fun, we'll decrypt our message, and you can see our message there is to our rabbit agents in the field who are fighting the endless battle against the horses, whom we will all destroy one day. But so we're working hard against that. And so just we'll leave you with the idea of really when you're building your applications, understand and think about state within your ACEs so you can maximize both the initial load times, the UI performance of your application, as well as limit the amount of network traffic as much as possible, because ultimately all of those things come together to help build the performance profile of your application, and state is a core part of that. And so with that, I have finished under time, and we'll pass things back over to Vesa.
Thank you, Patrick. Really cool demo and great explanation on the importance of the state. And I I love the rabbit against horses discussion as well. But great work on the regardless of the voice challenges, and hopefully that will get better for the next one as well. But thank you, Patrick, on that one. Really, really cool stuff. Good. Next on the demo queue, Sebastian. Which control are we going to cover today?
We will be covering the people picker today. So in our journey to look at a vast majority of our controls within the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, today we're going to really talk about the people picker, how that drives the value to select different type of entities around groups and the user entities inside Microsoft Graph. But before we go into demo mode, I want to do a quick recap of what is the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, or sometimes you might hear it about MGT. So the Microsoft Graph Toolkit is a collection of reusable and framework agnostic components. And it also adds authentication providers for accessing and working with the Microsoft Graph. So think about how you can drag and drop fully functional components inside your web applications, whether they are built with Angular, with Vue, with React, with plain HTML, whatever you want. These controls are web components that are delivering value across all the different frameworks that exist out there. They're also very customizable, and they work on any type of modern browser. So that's really the value that we're trying to deliver with the Microsoft Graph Toolkit. Why would you use them? First, you want to cut on development time. Building capabilities that are connecting to Microsoft Graph sometimes can be, even if connecting to Graph is usually a task that is quite easy to do, building controls that are delivering rich value is sometimes hard. So we want to save you some time and really focus on your business value by adding these UI components just with a simple line of code inside your application. We're going to look at that a little bit later. They're beautiful, but they're flexible. So we make the Microsoft Graph Toolkit controls look like Microsoft 365 leveraging the fluent UI design system that we have, but also we make them fully customizable. So if you want to bring your own branding, your own design guidelines, you can also do that. So providing the default value, but also enhancing the experience with customizing it to your own needs. And finally, it just works everywhere. As it's based on web standards, any type of browsers, any type of framework will use that. So you don't have to find a specific library for Angular or a specific library for Vue.js. No, you just need to use the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, and it's going to work across the variety of different capabilities that we have in the web today. I always love to say that there's a new JavaScript framework being invented every 15 seconds. So now we're potentially at like 4 new frameworks since I started this session today. So that's the beauty of the Graph Toolkit. We work even with the very, very, very newest stuff. Today we will be talking about the people picker. Well, the people picker is a simple component, but that drives so much value. How many times do you run across a scenario where you want to be able to build a form, build a UI that allows people to select users or groups from your organization? Maybe you're building and to build on top of demo from Dan today, maybe you're building something around emails and you'd love to have like a to field and a CC field and a BCC field where you can select people from around the organization. Well, that's one of the scenarios that delivered. Maybe you want to assign somebody, you can use this kind of control. And with all the different capabilities and settings that you can put on that control, you can really customize it to your own needs. So how to start? You drop in MGT into your page and you use the MGT people picker component. So let me dive into the code right away. And this is our app, right? our app starts with we're referencing our MGT packages. Here I'm using like plain HTML, the same plain HTML we've been using throughout the previous week. So not even like a framework in there, just like plain HTML, a couple of simple stylings to make it beautiful. And finally, we're using our provider and our login component. The provider connects your app to your Azure AD application and enforces all the different scopes and permissions that you need. Will also pop up for your username and password if you're not already logged in, thanks to the MGT login component that is right here on top. You can see it here. And finally, afterwards, we're just going to go through and look at all the different samples we have here. Let me just zoom in this guy a little bit so you can see it in a little bit better for y'all. So let's start with a simple picker experience. A simple picker experience is around one of the endpoints of graph, which is /me/people. That /me/people endpoint on graph is super important because it's built out of all the different signals that we have in Microsoft 365, meaning that if today I'm working very closely with Vesa, even if Vesa is not part of my direct organization or is not a direct report to me or whatsoever, there's still going to be a lot of signals, lots of chats, lots of emails, lots of collaboration around files. And want to make sure that the people you can find in these circumstances are the people that seems the more relevant to you. And that's exactly what we're doing here. So when we're just using the MGT people picker as is, well, when I click here, the people that we're seeing here are the people that are around me. It's not people that are around based on the structure of the organization, but really with people that are around my collaborative style. And here I can select these people. I will be able to select as many of them as I want. And I will be able to refer to these people to do something later. We're going to see that in just a bit. But this can be hooked up to any type of apps, any types of web form that is relevant. What do you find in there? Well, you find by default the name, the picture, all of that is all customizable thanks to the way that we're building the Microsoft Graph Toolkit with all the templates. So let me just quickly go to our documentation page so you can see it. When you go to our documentation page in graph.microsoft.com, you go to the docs, or you can just do aka.ms/mgt/docs. You can find the component you're looking for, and you can actually go to the templates. And these templates will tell you, hey, here are all the templates you can overwrite. So if you're not happy with how it's being displayed here, you can always say, hey, you know what? The selected person, so when the template that renders selected people, exactly this, you can override it with your own HTML styles and your own HTML controls in there. So here, you don't even have to think about how this plays out. You're going to have to redo the entire control. No, you just need to redefine this specific template here. We have an example of that we did last week with our people component, but it's really up to you to define this. All the documentation is right here. So now, what else does it do? It allows me to delete some of the person's wrong choice, but also it allows me to leverage other MGT controls, like the people card, for instance. So if I go on top of Joanna here, I will be able to pull up the full person card of this person. So you see how all of these controls are very tightly connected together and really delivers really interesting value. So that's the simple way, or the simpler way, to use the MGT people picker. But let's say here that you want to specifically define a group of people, not the people around you, but the people that are in a specific group. You can also do this. So when we're looking at this example here, you can change first here the placeholder. See it here. You can have a selection mode. So let's say I just want to select one single one. And finally, I could say group dash ID equals, and here you can paste in the ID of a group, or you can pass in via JavaScript based on the result of a selection from, I don't know, a group picker control. And then automatically it's going to do that. It's going to limit. So right now, let's just use it without limiting it. Now you see you were able to find your best colleague. So now I'm popping up again the trending people around me. I'm going to select Alex, and I won't be able to add anybody else. The controls becomes disabled for adding new people in there. I can clear and start again and choose whatever you think. Let me go on to the next one. A simple people picker for groups. So as part of the MGT people picker, you always have the ability to say what you're looking for. By default, here it would say any, A and Y. That means you can look for anything. But in my case, you know what? I want to specifically look for groups because I want to notify a group of people based on the different groups created in Azure Active Directory. What I can do here, I can go here, and now you see the experience is not the same. The experience now allows me to find the most recent groups around me. And now I can say, maybe I'm going to go in leadership. I want to notify leadership. I can do that. So you see now from a people picker, it's also a group picker that you can have here. I can go this one, and now I can do whatever I want with this. When you can use distribution group, you can use Microsoft 365 groups, you can use security groups, any of those. You can also limit some of them. Right here, I think it would be group type. For example, I think it's called unified. I go unscripted here, which is never a good idea. And there you go. Here's all the unified, which are all Microsoft 365 groups, or potentially even teams. So now I can go in here and select all of them directly from the people picker. Something also that is super relevant, especially when you're working with people within groups, you have the ability on a people picker to say, I want to connect to this specific group ID, but also I want to have transitive search. So it means that not only I'm going to find the people within the specific group, but I'm also going to find the people that are in groups that are within my group. So if your group has different structures, a group could have multiple groups. Well, in this case, you can use transitive search, and you can find people from any of these nested groups right in here, and you can use. That's a great way to use MGT when you're building, I would say, advanced scenarios. Now, we want to build a little bit of interactivity. For example, we want to have a people picker with this selection change. So first here, we're going to build just a regular people picker. And underneath, I'm going to have an MGT people component where I'm going to showcase the selection from my people picker. I'm going to do it. I'm going to hook this ID to a JavaScript function. So let me go to the JavaScript function right here. So here you see I'm basically adding an event listener that is called the selection change to this ID. So basically, MGT will fire or will trigger the selection changed event when there's something new, that like when the selection inside the combo box or inside the picker changed. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to assign my other ID, the selection showcase, which is my list of people. I'm going to assign it to the details that are coming from my event here. Automatically, we add all the details from the MGT picker. So all the data that is currently selected, we add it there, and then afterwards, we're just going to display it. So for example, if I go here and I select Sebastian, now you can see that just at the bottom here, we have another thing that was done. If I add Lydia, it's going to add Lydia here. So you see how you can be very interactive and how you can interact with the different activities happening inside the picker. So if I do this, it's also going to remove it. And if I do this, now we're back to the beginning. So it's really how we're liking to think about the people picker, because now it really allows you to build your custom logic in there. Some other things you can do with the people picker is right here is to predefine which will be the user IDs that will be selected. Think about if you're storing your user IDs in a database, or maybe you already have that array of people that you have access to. Here you can simply just pass in an array of user IDs, and we're going to do a default selection on these. So it means that I can continue adding some of them. I can add these guys, but they will always be there. But then I can also remove them. It's really up to me. You can do the exact same thing for groups. So if you want to do a default selection on groups, you can do it using the default selected group IDs. Something you might want to do also is get data from another API or even from Graph. In this case, for example, what I want to do is I want to here add all my direct reports as the pre-selected ones, but I don't have a way to specify which endpoint this is all about, and I don't know because it's dynamic, so I don't necessarily have all these user IDs. So what we've been doing is we added an ID here so we can hook ourselves onto this specific people picker, and in JavaScript, what we're going to do is we will be doing a call to Graph. We're going to validate that we are logged in. And then afterwards, we will be calling the /me/direct reports, which is an API that is available that yields all of my direct reports, where I will be able to assign to the pre-selected people the result.value. And from there, I will be able to assign this. So this can come from either from Graph, but it can also come from any of your API. And then here, we're going to be able to play with it. Something also interesting, we have put this in read-only, just because we disabled it. Maybe you're using in the display form, you don't want to enable people to modify it, then you have the ability to do it here. Finally, something that we enabled also is a people picker, or almost like an email address picker, where you can add any email. For example, here I can do seb@outlook.com. Then I can just hit enter. This dear@vesa.com. Is that your email, Vesa? Where
it's
you
actually
can add
dearvesa@microsoft.com.
there you go. I would not be surprised. That would be true, actually. And you would have the way to add any email address. So if you're building, I don't know, an email client, or you want to do any of that, this really, really allows you to do these kind of scenarios. So if you want to look into the people picker, I recommend that you are going to any of our resources, our repo, our docs, the samples that I'm building right now. You can have all of the previous sessions, including today's one. Our playground, if you want to go play with MGT, and if you want to learn, aka.ms/mgt/learn. Back to you, Vesa.
Excellent. Thank you, Sebastian, on that one. We are almost on hours, so let's quickly close up the call as well. So thank you, Dan. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Sebastian. Really, really cool stuff and cool demos. Awesome to get those recorded as well as a reusable demos for the future in the YouTube channel. Now, just a quick recap. We have a lot of community demos and community calls running. We have this weekly Tuesday call, and then on Thursdays, 7 a.m. Pacific time, we have a recurrent call with a bi-weekly setup. This week, we also have the Power Apps monthly community call happening tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So there's a lot of these opportunities based on your interest on joining the Microsoft 365 developer community. But thank you for this one. The recording will be available in 24 hours in the Microsoft 365 community YouTube channel. Notice you cannot download the recording from the Teams chat. It does not work for the external people. So that's why we're publishing everything in 24 hours in YouTube. And if you want to get notified when that's happening, please follow us on Twitter. That's the easiest way to know on all of the announcements, new videos, and all of that as well. But thank you, everybody, for this one. We'll be back within a week for Microsoft 365 platform call. Thank you. Bye-bye.